Sunday you came up to me kind of bent over saying, this back sure is in pain. And I'm glad to see you sitting here tonight. That's a blessing. So have you gotten some relief from that? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people have said I need therapy. But anyway. All right. Well, yeah, okay. It is good to see y'all. A good group here tonight. Didn't we have a great day Sunday? Wasn't Sunday wonderful? And wow, what a good crowd. What a sweet spirit in the service. Didn't you enjoy Brother Larry Phillips? I mean that, and then Brother Robert. He's just Brother Robert. We love Brother Robert, and what an appropriate. I thought both of those guys were just tremendously appropriate in what they had to say. And Larry helping us look back on Cannon, and then Robert kind of helping us look forward, and then the praise team, and Pam did good, right? Anyway, all right, well, let's start tonight. Tonight's lesson is real disturbing, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But if you would take this hymn couldn't be any more of the antithesis to the lesson, and we'll get to all that in a few minutes. But 210, my Jesus, I love thee. Let's look at this and just remain seated. Let's sing this together. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. For thee all the follies of sin I resign. My gracious Redeemer, my Savior art thou. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. I love thee because thou hast first loved me and purchased my pardon on Calvary's tree. I love thee for wearing the thorns on thy brow. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. I love thee in life, I will love thee in death, and praise thee as long as thou lendest me breath, and say when the death dew lies cold on my brow, if ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. In mansions of glory and endless delight, I'll ever adore thee in heaven so bright, and singing thy praises before thee I'll bow. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. Miss Vicki, ask God to bless our Bible study, please. Amen. Thank you. Find Judges 19. My goal is to spend 3 more weeks in Judges. If we need an extra, I hope to get through tonight this chapter and a little bit of the next one, chapter 19, and then finish up. And then the first four Wednesday nights in October to examine the 4 chapters of the book of Ruth is my plan. And God always has the authority to lead us in other directions as a church and as whatever we need to do. But if you will find Judges 19, let me just, by the way of review quickly, because 2 chapters were about Micah and his family. And something very interesting, Micah lived in Mount Ephraim, okay? And a traveler, a Levite from Bethlehem, came and ended up in Ephraim. And in our study tonight, we have a Levite already living in Ephraim that went down and found a bride in Bethlehem. So, but both of these stories, and the one with Micah, it's important to remember that chronologically in the book of Judges, we ended the chronological order with Samson in chapter 16. 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 were included under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to the unknown writer. I've never called out who the writer of Judges is, frankly, because I don't know. But the writer of Judges, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, felt it necessary to give us some of these stories. And I think the reasoning for these stories, only reason I can find theologically for this story tonight is as a warning of how a nation without God can sink so deeply into debauchery and things. So, but anyway, Micah's mother she had saved up all this money, was cussing everybody, but her money being gone, her $8,500 worth being gone. Finally, her son Micah, Mom, I got it, just settle down. Oh, bless you, my son. And I found a little comedy in that in the same verse, she was cursing everybody and then blessed her son for finding the money, for admitting to stealing her money, actually. It's kind of a kooky story, but, while she was cussing everybody, she was, oh, that money was put aside for God, But then when the money was found, oh, well, I took 1,100 of those, here's a couple of hundred to go do something with. And what did they do? They made idols to worship, handmade idols, but they messed up in the same way that Gideon did, was that they made an ephod, which was a vestment worn by the priest when he did his priestly duty. I equate that with that the ephod was an item used in worship. And just like Gideon, the item used in worship became the object of worship. You see what I mean? And we do that in this day and age with music styles or whatever, lighting, smoke machines, whatever. Like we can get to worshiping all the peripheral stuff that has to do with worship and forget why we're worshiping. And when they made the ephods, that's what happened. Anyway, they did all that. Then the Levite comes from Bethlehem. He's running away. He's got a job. Levites had a job. When they hit 20 years old, they automatically went into the service of the temple. And so he had a job, but he was a minister on the run for some reason. And so he ended up in Mount Ephraim. By the way, he had, just like our story tonight, when you go from Bethlehem to Mount Ephraim, you've got to go right through Shiloh. Well, what was it? Shiloh, the Ark of the Covenant, and the tabernacle. And Phineas, in our story tonight, we weren't told last week. So timing-wise, I think last week's story might have actually been after this story, because we're told specifically in chapter 20 tonight that Phineas was the priest in Israel at this time, and that was right after Joshua. Okay, so this was pretty early after Joshua. But anyway, so Micah, the young Levite comes. When the Danites, they never did. There's sin all over the place. The Danites never did do what they were told to do. That never took the land that Joshua said, take this land. They decided, we want something better. Well, they went up to Laish, and they sent 600 families, men that were willing to fight to take Laish and their families, and they all stopped in Mount Ephraim for the night. So the Levite, we don't have his name nor the Levite in the story tonight, but the Levite's out there at the gate, uh, you know, conversing and having a big time with the 600 visitors out there. Man, we don't get this many visitors up here in Ephraim. Anyway, he's out there talking to them, and while they're talking, those 5 guys that had come through earlier, hey, you know what's in there? There's idols and there's all kinds of stuff, and they got their own priest. Well, you know what they did? They made him a better offer. The Danites went. They completely destroyed Laish. The people of Laish were so comfortable. They were so satisfied. It says they did not even have a magistrate in Laish because, man, everybody was fat and sassy and life was good. And that's where the Danites said, instead of where they were supposed to be, they said, that's where we're going. And the other reason, now the writer tonight, well, I could tell you when we get there, but he makes reference, Dan originally was in the southern part. But when these guys went up to Laish and settled up there, many times you will get like the writer in tonight's story, it might come next week, but he uses the terminology as used often from Dan to Beersheba, meaning from the north to the south. Well, originally Dan was not, and so that's why we know that the writing of Judges came later, because Dan was actually, at the time of this writing, Dan was not in the north. So that's an indication that the writing of this book, and that's why it's unknown, basically. But so that was the idolatry of the Danites, and they made him a better offer. But what happened at the end of chapter 18? Then when they all got settled, they set up the idols, and then what does the Bible say? Then they made somebody else who had a resume. He had a better resume than this young Levite who was on the run. They took this congregation of supposedly God's children, found somebody with a better resume, and where this Levite who left Micah's compound for, what they enticed him with? They enticed him with, you can be more important, you can have more responsibility, you can have a greater circle of influence if you come and be the priest over a whole tribe. And this young Levite, yeah, I'm all about that. And as Brother Carl, I'm sure, can tell you, the grass is not always greener. And when the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, it's just getting more manure, usually. So, and so that's why the young Levite, when he goes to Dan, he is totally cast aside. And that's what happened. And so that was the idolatry of the Danites. So let's go to chapter 19, and we have another Levite. Okay, so timing-wise, again, I think this occurred maybe before the other story, maybe not, but there were some similarities in the story. It is not the same Levite. This is a different Levite. But let's look. And it came to pass, the writer wants us to know right away that the main problem in Israel was there was no leadership. A lack of leadership. And the very last verse that we're going to get to in chapter 21 says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And so we're told this several times throughout the book of Judges. In those days there was no king, and everybody did that which was right. But now there was a certain Levite sojourning. Now this guy's on a trip. This guy, the difference in this guy is that the other Levite was running away from his responsibilities as a Levite. This guy was probably running toward his responsibilities, in that he left Mount Ephraim and he was going back through Shiloh down to Bethlehem, and he makes the statement later on that on his way back he needs to stop at the house of the Lord. So he's obviously talking about stopping at Shiloh, most likely to whatever involved his ministry or his job as a Levite was for that reason. So in opposite of running away from being a Levite, this guy's all about fulfilling being a Levite. He wants to get back. We'll see that in a minute. So a certain Levite, and he on the side of Mount Ephraim, and he took him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Now, Bethlehem, we know all about Bethlehem. Bethlehem is 6 miles south of Jerusalem, and that's important to know later on, and keep that in mind. But the concubine, that's kind of a strange thing, because do we really know what that is? And I've been a Christian, let's see, What's 63 minus 6? So I've been a Christian 57 years, right? So, and I didn't really quite, you hear about the concubines of Solomon, and everybody has one. So I dug into that a little this week, and what I found out was that a bride could fully be called a bride. As a matter of fact, she's called a concubine here, but then he is referred to, and look at verse 3, what's it refer to him? And her husband. So what I found out by digging into that was that a concubine was simply a lesser bride. Now, what is that about? In the Middle Eastern culture, a lot of times the marriages were arranged, marriages were big and fancy, the bride had a dowry, and all of these formalities of a bride. In the case of a concubine, it may just be as much of a marriage as, say, anybody that eloped instead of had a church wedding kind of thing. That meant there was not really a dowry. How about this Levite? Levites were not really able to make and put away a bunch of money, right? Because of who they were and what their job was. So he didn't have a lot of money to give her as a dowry. Whatever her deal was, she didn't. So it was not a formal wedding, but she was every bit his wife. I wanted to clear that up when the scripture says concubine. There was no formal wedding. There just wasn't all the fanfare involved in this case. So anyway, out of Bethlehem, Judah. But now, some translations tell us that if you read this passage in some other translations, it comes from some of the original texts where it said they actually had a disagreement. Now, the King James said she played the whore, which you know what that means. But for whatever reason, it wasn't all wedded bliss for the newlyweds, and she went off and committed adultery and went back to her father's house. So she's there at the end of verse 2. After she's down there 4 months, and after 4 months, and it's clear here, her husband, he's like, you know what? I want her back. I want her to come back, and so he arose and he went after her to speak friendly to her and to bring her again, having servants with him. And now, the next thing, a couple of asses or 2 donkeys, right? So here's the thing. If he went down there with his servant, but he took with him 2 donkeys, what's he expecting? Her needing a ride home, right? He's every bit expecting to bring her home. I admire him for having enough confidence and faith to take the extra donkey to say, man, she's coming home with me. But now when she gets down there, some of this a little bit comical, because look at verse 3. When he gets down there, she brings him into the father's house. Now her dad, I don't know what this father-daughter relationship was like, but if he knew what she'd been up to, he was really glad to see her husband coming, right? And he was so glad. Man, he rejoiced to meet him. Oh man, that's your husband, great. I'm going to be a grandpa. And whatever. And the father-in-law, and again here, why do we believe it's a real legitimate marriage? Because he's called her husband, and this is called his father-in-law. His father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him. Hey man, come on in, stay with us a while. And he abode there. Look, he went down there to get her because he had stuff to do, and he went down there to get her. And now it's been, in verse 4, how long's it been? 3 days. And so it's been there 3 days, so he did eat and drink and lodge there. They were having a good time. He was getting to meet his new father-in-law. His new father-in-law loved his son-in-law. Man, they went fishing, they went hunting, they told stories, and watched Andy Griffith reruns together. But anyway, yeah, you know what Abraham Lincoln said, right? Don't believe everything you see on the internet, right? Anyway, in verse 5, and it came to pass look at this, on the what day in verse 5? 4 days now, when they got up early in the morning. Okay, this is the day. I got to go. I got stuff I got to do. I got to get back to my responsibilities. Early in the morning, he got up to depart, and the damsel's father said to his son-in-law, oh man, comfort your heart. No need to rush off. Just stay a while. Take it easy. take it, be comfortable here with a morsel of bread. That just means another meal, man. And I don't know, this young Levite, that sounded good to him. So what did they do in verse 6? They sat down, they ate and drank both of them together. For the damsel's father had said to the man, be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. Well, they've spent most of the day now. And when the man rose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him, verse 7, therefore he lodged there again. Now, this is getting a little crazy, right? So now in verse 8, what day are we on? How many days has he been down there now? Five days he's been down there trying to get this woman to go home with him. And so 5 days after the damsel's father said, comfort thy heart, I pray thee. And they tarried again. He got sucked into it again till the afternoon. But they ate. But in verse 9, finally he said, look, this is it. I got to go. I got stuff to do, and we've got to go. He and his concubine, mission accomplished, right? He got her, brought the 2 donkeys, and brought the servant to help with everything. And the father-in-law, the father said, behold, the day draweth toward evening. Now, remember, every time the word behold shows up, that means something is really drastic going to happen that's out of the ordinary. So this behold is just a preview, behold, of what's going to happen in this chapter. Behold, look, it's getting late in the afternoon. Just stay one more day, and then tomorrow get up and go, and then make your heart merry. Tomorrow, go ahead, just go tomorrow. Go tomorrow. But verse 10, the man would not tarry. He said, I can't do it. I know it's unorthodox to leave late in the afternoon. He'd risen up early on 5 days now to get going, early in the trip. And so for 5 days, he said, that's it. I don't care if it's late or not. We've got to make some progress toward getting home. And they did that. And in verse 10, would not tarry. He rose up and they departed. And they came over against Jebus. Now that's interesting to call it Jebus because it is the city of Jerusalem that we know and love. But it is occupied by the Jebusites, which are unfriendly at this point in time toward the children of Israel. Why? They'd made a mess under Joshua, destroying everything and everybody, and children of Israel. For some reason, he felt that, well, we'll get into that in a minute. So in verses 1 through 10, we have the Levite and the bride. In verses 11 through 21, I call it just let me go home, because that's what he's trying to do. Let me go home, just let me go home. And Vicki and I love to throw out 60s and 70s pop music references, and there's one, let me go home. Anyways, that's what he's doing here. He said, look, he just wants to go home. Look in verse 11. They had gone to Jebus. Well, now, where did they start out? They were down in Bethlehem, right? Okay, so by this time, how far did I say at the beginning? How far was Jerusalem from Bethlehem? About 6 miles, right? So when they'd come about 6 miles, it was getting late. And but remember, they're on donkeys at this point. And the servant said, man, I'm tired. He said, can we stop here in Jerusalem with the Jebusites and lodge in it? Now here's the irony. The man in verse 12, the Levite, and he said unto him, we will not turn aside here because it is a city of strangers. He didn't want to stop in that city because he did not feel safe. And that's the irony of this whole story. And he said, let's go, if we can go a little bit farther, man, let's go about 4 more miles on the other side, and we'll come to the town of Gibeah. And so that would have meant they walked and rode that donkey about 10 miles that afternoon, which that's a haul walking. For us, man, it's 8 miles back to my house, and I can be there in 15 minutes, right? So no big deal. But for them to walk at was a big deal. They're tired. But look at what happens. Remember, the Jebusites hated Israelites, so they didn't stop there. But when they get to Gibeah is in Ramah. Now, this is a town that is occupied by Benjamites, those from the tribe of Benjamin, okay? So when they get there, in verse 13, come, let's draw near. Let's get to one of these places. So surely, man, we'll find a place to lodge when we get up to Gibeah. Remember, people would open their homes and they would let people stay the night. And so they passed on in verse 14. They went their way and the sun went down. So it's gotten, what? They're traveling, they're on foot, and it's gotten dark, right? Sun has gone down. And they were in Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. Now that makes all the difference in this story, because this guy's a Levite. These guys are Benjamites, but they're brothers, right? They're all brothers from the tribes of Israel. And so they come in and they turned aside. They looked for a place to go in and lodge in Gibeah. And he went in, and eventually in verse 15, they just sat down in the street. There was nobody to take them. There was no room in the inn when they had come from Bethlehem. And so they sat down in the street, for there was no one that would take them in to rest or to lodge. And so, and behold, have you ever been in a pickle and behold? I thought of this when I was a teenager. I told y'all before that my dad worked for a German company, and so once a year, Dad had to go to Germany, to like Munich, and all, and for business. But he always worked it out to where that he could do his business stuff, and the family could come, and then we'd take a couple of weeks and do something. And we did that for several years while Dad worked for that company. But one of those trips, Dad had finished their thing in Germany, and so we go down to Italy, and we're riding around in Italy, and we come to Rome, and man, we'd been driving, and we couldn't find any. Me and my 3 sisters, my mom and dad, all 6 of us in a sedan, and and everything's packed in there, and we couldn't find anywhere to stay. And anyway, it was getting late, and so we're getting out of the car to stretch, and Mom and Dad are talking, and we hear this voice, "Y'all need some help." It was great, because the Halversons, and they were from Texas, and he was over working with an American company. Do y'all need some help? And I thought of that. I hadn't thought of that story in a long time, but for these travelers who had even been walking, do y'all need some help? And he wasn't actually, this guy wasn't from there. The old man was from Mount Ephraim. Well, where was this Levite living? In Ephraim. He was from somebody from back home. And that couple, they made a couple of, they knew the contacts. They made a couple of calls, and we found some sort of place, hotel place that we stayed. And anyway, that was wonderful to have a friendly voice to find us late at night in a strange place. And that's what happened to these folks. And so behold, there came this old man, and he had been working out in the field. And he was also from Ephraim, and he sojourned. He had ended up in Gibeah, and the men of the place, we have already established this, they were Benjamites from the tribe of Benjamin. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man. What's that down there in the street? Well, he saw them. And he goes down there in verse 17, and he said, "Hey, where are y'all headed? Whither goest thou?" And verse 18, he said unto them, we've come from Bethlehem. Man, we've been traveling at least 10 miles. And it's late, it's dark. He said, and from Ephraim, on the side of Mount Ephraim, and thence am I. That's where I'm from. He said to the old man, "I'm from Ephraim, and we're just trying to get back there." And he said, and here's that thing in the end of verse 18 I was telling you about. "And I am going to the house of the Lord." That's his intention, to go stop probably in Shiloh where the tabernacle was, right? So he said, I'm trying to get back to Ephraim. I got to go to get to Shiloh. We need to stop for the night. Look at what he says in 19. Man, we've got straw. We've got everything we need. We've got bread. We've got wine. We got everything packed on these donkeys. All we need is to lay down and get some rest so we can hit it again in the morning, in verse 19. And so, and for the young man, which is thy servant, we don't need anything. There's no want of anything. Verse 20. And the old man said, Peace be with you. That's a nice thing for somebody to say when you, especially a stranger. Howsoever, he said, look, I got everything you need. Don't you need to stay in the street? If you need it, I got it. So just come with me. So he brought them into his house. He gave them provender, and they washed their feet, and they did eat and drink. Man, what a wonderful experience after that long travel to find a guy that would bring them in. Well, thirdly, let's look at the wicked Benjamites. I mean, that's all I can say. This is just the part now that we're getting into is going to be very disturbing. And so, verse 22 through 30, let's look at it. So in 22, now, as they were making merry, they were having a good time, they were eating and drinking, fellowshipping, talking about stories from back home. Then, behold, this behold is an awful behold. Behold, the men of the city, now these were Benjamites, right? But what are they called? Sons of Belial. They had the devil in them. Your mama ever say something like, you got the devil in you? But these guys really did. This was because what they're about to do can be considered nothing but from the pit of hell. And so they beset the house round and about, and they beat on the door, and they spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into your house, the man that came into your house, that we may know him. You know that's the biblical know. Do you know that this is exactly what happened in Sodom, where Lot lived? And this story is repeated for us, just like the story in Sodom. Now, no doubt, the Levite and the man from Ephraim living there had been taught about Sodom and Gomorrah. They knew the consequences of such sinfulness. And then the man, the master of the house, this kind old man, he went out and said to them, brethren, don't do this. I pray you, don't do so wickedly. You ought to underline that, so wickedly, because the Bible makes itself clear what it thinks about this particular sin. And in our nation, we give a whole month to celebrate that wickedness. If you drive up here, if you jump on 123 to get here, or if you're running a few minutes late like we always might be, we come up through here. But then there's a house between here and Walmart flying proudly a rainbow flag out front right here. And we have, look, the rainbow's pretty. You know, God gave the rainbow, and a beautiful sign is a rainbow. And the Bible lets us know this is pure wickedness. This is wicked. Look, you know, I don't ever get caught up by the culture. This is not acceptable behavior. We are called all kinds of things for believing this. We're labeled all kinds of things for believing, thus saith the Lord. But it's wicked, and the Bible makes us, and it's so wicked. Look at this. It is so wicked. They said, do not this folly. Verse 24. This is wicked what they're fixing to do. But for some reason, they thought this was a better alternative. I'm just saying, don't lose sight of how wicked this was for them to think this is a better alternative. It's not. It's awful. But behold, here's my daughter, a maiden, a young virgin. Take my virgin daughter. Isn't that the same thing that Lot offered up? And take this man's concubine too. Well, here's the kind old man offering up his daughter and this man's concubine. If you won't do this awful sin of sodomy and homosexuality, you can have these women. And them, I'll bring them out now. Look, humble yourself. Humble you them. This is terrible. Humble them. Like, that's just awful, telling what goes with that. And do with them what seems good to you. How disgusting. But unto this man, don't do such a vile thing, this young priest. But the men, they wouldn't hearken. And this is very disturbing. So the man took his wife, took his concubine, and he gave her to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. All night long. They just did unspeakable things. Verse 26, then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and she's at the door. She had literally crawled back to the door of this house where this old man was staying, where her Lord was, small L-O-R-D, just remember that always means office, position, was until it was light. Now here's a statement I can't even understand in verse 27. And when he rose up in the morning. If he rose up in the morning, what had he been doing? He went all the way to Bethlehem, took a second donkey to go get her, gave her to these fellas, and went to bed. I don't get that. I just can't for the life of me. Honestly, this lesson's disturbed me all week, since last week. Let's get through it. But I promise not to skip verses that are hard. Anyway, and the Lord, this guy rose up early in the morning, opened the doors, and he went to go on. He said, it's time for us to get going. Get up. Behold, the concubine was fallen down at the door, and her hands were on the threshold. In verse 28, in all his compassion, get up. The same woman he went to get, but there was no answer. Then the man took her up upon his donkey, and the man rose up and got onto his place. He put her dead body on the donkey and went home. And went all the way back to Ephraim with his wife's dead body on the donkey. And when he got to his house, he took a knife and he took her and he cut her into 12 pieces. Now, again, this is awful hard stuff. Can you imagine the guilt that this Levite man rode back with? I mean, he went back for her. He loved her, right? And what's going through his mind all the way back to Ephraim, back home? And for a way to honor her, maybe in his own strange way, this is all I can figure. He said, you know what? We can't let this go. And he cuts her in 12 pieces and sends one piece to each tribe all around Israel to say, hey, this is what these Benjamites did to my wife. And maybe that was a way to honor her. I don't know. But it was certainly a way to make Israel aware of the problem in Benjamin. And verse 28, and it was so that all that saw it said, there is no such deed done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of Egypt unto this day. Think about this. Take advice, and then speak your minds. Take this piece of my wife, look at it, think about it, and then think about what we should do. Let's quickly get through some verses in 21 through 11, because this next chapter is really long, and I want to finish it up next week, that chapter. Then all the children, and so finally, Israel is confronted with the sin of Benjamin. That's 21 through 11. Let's just read through it. Then all the children of Israel went out, and they came and they gathered from Dan to Beersheba. Again, that's that statement from north to south. And they gathered in Gilead unto the land, unto the Lord in Mizpah. So they're all meeting together to decide what are we going to do about this. And the chief of all the people, even the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God. 400,000 showed up. They were outraged at this situation, and 400,000 show up to say, man, we're going to do something about this. And if Benjamin heard that the children, so Benjamin in verse 3, Benjamin says, what's going on down there in Mizpah? And they want to know. They want to know what is happening down there in Mizpah. Then said the children of Israel, tell us, how was this wickedness? Tell us what happened. And the Levite man, check this out in verses 4 through 6, he tells them the story. The Levite, the husband of the woman that was slain, he answered. He said, I came to Gibeah and belonged to Benjamin, and I and my concubine to the lodge. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and beset the house round about me at night. And they thought to have slain me. And my concubine have they forced that she is dead. And I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent through. You see what did he leave out of that story? If you read his account in those verses, there's one fact that he just forgot to tell him. He put her out there. He didn't say that. I just noticed that as you read through that. That part's not in there. 7 and 8. Look at 7 and 8. Behold, you are all the children of Israel. Remember, there wasn't Israel and Judah. There was no north and south kingdom. Remember, there's no king in Israel. So they had not yet divided until after Solomon and Rehoboam came along. But you are children of Israel. Give here your advice and counsel. He's saying, hey, we're all brothers in this thing. What do you think we should do about this? And all the people arose as one man in unity, in unison. Man, we got to take care of this. This can't happen. We'll go to tent. We won't turn away any man to his house. We'll go take care of this right now. And in verses 9 and 10, look at, they decide, well, 400,000 is an awful lot. We don't need 400,000. What we're going to do, we're going to take out, we're 9 and 10, this shall be the thing which we're going to do in Gibeah. We're going to go by lot. We're going to choose which tribe should go up. And of them, we're going to take 10 men of 100. They're going to leave 10% to be the supply lines. It's funny, at lunch today, they were out of several things because of the supply line being broken down. My dad was a supply sergeant that supplied Iwo Jima, and they had to have supply people, to carry out the rest of the thing. But when we take 10 men of 100 and we'll take 100,000, and you can do all the math, and we're going to make sure they have something to eat. We're going to make sure they have everything that they need, and they're going to come to Gibeah of Benjamin according to the folly that they have done. So all the men of Israel were gathered against that city, knit together as one man. We're going to stop right there and pick up the story next week. But awful story. The story is very similar to the story that happened to Lot. There's actually another story that's a lot lesser known, but we're told about. Remember at the Garden of Gethsemane, we don't talk about this much, but remember, some fellas ripped Mark's clothes off of him that night, and for similar purposes, and Mark got away in the New Testament. But I think these scriptures are there. These are God's people and God's children, and to warn us as a nation and as his children that if you don't follow the Lord, this is the kind of depths that you can get into. This is the kind of stuff that one nation under God can find itself doing. And you don't have to watch the news very long to see that we're in trouble as a nation, and that's on our prayer list, to pray for our nation. So if you'll take that and use these verses tonight to remind us that we do definitely need to pray for our nation. Need to pray. We've got stuff here, the economy, and it was just ironic that there was a speech being delivered yesterday about the health of our economy, and the scroll underneath it says stock market crashes 1,200 points. Inflation index up to 8 point something. During this speech, celebrating how it was the irony of all ironies. And so, yeah, pray for our nation. Pray for, gas. People, gas hurts a lot of people, and people that need to do things. And so remember that. Reba, you're